The coffee maker sputtered its last drop at 2:47 a.m., and Tiana Williams knew her 16-hour shift was far from over. Her feet screamed inside worn sneakers as she wiped down tables that seemed to multiply every time she turned around. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows under her tired eyes. 3 customers remained: a trucker nursing his 4th cup of coffee, an elderly woman picking at apple pie, and a man in an expensive suit sitting with 2 young girls who couldn't be older than 7. The man looked completely out of place in the rundown diner. His charcoal gray suit probably cost more than Tiana made in 3 months, and his watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist. But what struck her most was the exhaustion in his dark eyes, the way his broad shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight. The twin girls beside him fidgeted in their seats, identical in every way except for their hair ribbons, one pink, one purple. "Daddy, I'm hungry," the girl with the pink ribbon whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "I know, Sophia. I'm trying to figure out what we can order," he replied softly, scanning the menu with growing frustration. Tiana had watched them for 20 minutes now. The man kept checking his phone, his jaw tightening each time he looked at the screen. The girls grew restless, their innocent chatter filling the awkward silence. Something about the scene made her heart ache. She recognized the look of someone fighting battles no one else could see. Her own phone buzzed with a text from the hospital: "Payment overdue. Please contact billing immediately." Tiana's stomach dropped. Grandma Rose's medical bills were piling up faster than she could count, and the eviction notice crumpled in her apron pocket felt like a ticking time bomb. She had 48 hours to come up with $1,200 or lose the apartment where her grandmother was recovering from her latest heart episode. The diner's bell chimed as the trucker left, dropping a measly $2 tip on a $15 tab. Tiana bit back tears of frustration and walked over to the family's table, forcing her brightest smile despite feeling like her world was crumbling around her. "Hi there, I'm Tiana. Sorry for the wait. What can I get for you folks tonight?" The man looked up and for a moment their eyes met. His were a deep brown, kind but guarded, surrounded by fine lines that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy responsibilities. "We're still deciding," he said carefully. "The girls are pretty tired and I want to make sure we order something they'll actually eat." "Daddy always burns pancakes," the girl with the purple ribbon, Grace, announced with the brutal honesty only children possess. A genuine laugh escaped Tiana's lips for the first time all day. "Well, lucky for you, our cook makes the best pancakes in the city. They're fluffy as clouds and come with real maple syrup. Would you like to try some?" Both girls nodded eagerly, but their father hesitated. He glanced at his phone again and Tiana caught sight of multiple missed calls and urgent messages. Whatever was happening in his life, it was serious. "The pancakes sound perfect," he said finally. "And coffee for me. Black." As Tiana walked away, she overheard Grace whisper to her sister, "He looks sad again." "Maybe the nice lady can make him smile," Sophia whispered back. The simple exchange hit Tiana like a physical blow. These little girls were worried about their father the same way she worried about her grandmother. They were all fighting their own battles, trying to hold their small worlds together with determination and love. She rang up their order and stared at the total, $18.50. Through the kitchen window she watched the man check his wallet, count bills, then check his phone again. His jaw tightened, and he ran a hand through his dark hair in obvious frustration. The girls chatted quietly, unaware of their father's distress, coloring on napkins with crayons from their small backpacks. Something inside Tiana shifted. Maybe it was seeing her own struggles reflected in a stranger's eyes, or maybe it was the way those little girls looked at their father with such trust and love despite whatever was troubling him. She thought about her grandmother's words, "Baby, when you're down to nothing, God is up to something. And sometimes we're the answer to someone else's prayer." Without hesitation, Tiana walked back to their table carrying 3 plates of steaming pancakes and a fresh cup of coffee. "Here we go," she said, setting the plates down. "Our chef's special recipe, made with extra love tonight." The girls' faces lit up like Christmas morning. They immediately started cutting into the fluffy pancakes, syrup dripping down their chins as they took eager bites. "These are the best pancakes ever," Grace declared, syrup coating her lips. "Better than the fancy hotel," Sophia agreed between bites. Their father smiled for the first time since they'd walked in, watching his daughters enjoy their meal. "Thank you," he said to Tiana, pulling out his wallet. "What do I owe you?" Tiana took a deep breath, knowing this decision might cost her the job she desperately needed. "Tonight it's on the house. Consider it a welcome to Murphy's special." The man's eyes widened in surprise. "I can't let you do that. Please let me pay." Sir, sometimes we all need a little kindness from strangers. Your girls are absolute angels, and you look like you could use one small thing to go right today. For a moment, the man's composure cracked. His eyes glistened with unshed tears and he nodded slowly. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what this means. But Tiana did know. She knew exactly what it meant to be overwhelmed, to feel like the world was pressing down from all sides, to wonder if things would ever get better. She knew what it meant to be touched by unexpected kindness when you needed it most. The girls finished their pancakes with enthusiasm, and their father sipped his coffee slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. When they finally stood to leave, he pulled a $20 bill from his wallet and placed it on the table. For the excellent service, he said quietly. Before Tiana could protest, the little girls rushed over and hugged her legs tight. Thank you for the best dinner ever, Sophia said. You're the nicest waitress in the whole world, Grace added. As they walked toward the door, Tiana heard Grace whisper to her sister, I like her. She made Daddy smile. Me too, Sophia whispered back. Maybe she can be our new mommy. The words hit Tiana like lightning, but before she could process them fully, the family was gone, leaving only the $20 tip and the lingering scent of expensive cologne mixed with little girl shampoo. Tiana stood alone in the empty diner, holding the $20 bill that wouldn't solve her problems but felt like a small miracle anyway. She had given away $18 worth of food when she couldn't afford to lose a penny, but something deep inside told her it was the right thing to do. Her phone buzzed again. Another overdue notice. Reality crashed back down, but for just a moment she had felt like she made a difference in someone else's life. Maybe her grandmother was right. Maybe when you had nothing left to give, giving anyway was exactly what the world needed. Outside, snow began to fall on the empty Chicago streets, and Tiana wondered if she'd ever see the mysterious family again. Have you ever wondered what would happen if one simple act of kindness could change your entire life? Will Tiana's generosity come back to help her when she needs it most? Hit subscribe and share your thoughts about what you think will happen next in the comments below. 3 days passed before the family returned, but Tiana had thought about them constantly. Every time the diner's bell chimed, she looked up hoping to see the two little girls with their worried father. When they finally walked through the door on Thursday evening, her heart skipped with genuine happiness. This time the man looked different. His suit was navy blue instead of charcoal, and while he still carried that air of exhaustion, there was something softer about his expression. The girls bounced ahead of him, scanning the diner until they spotted Tiana behind the counter. It's her, Daddy, Grace pointed excitedly. The nice pancake lady. Sophia tugged on his hand. Can we sit in her section? Please? He nodded and they chose a booth near the window. Tiana grabbed 3 menus and walked over, genuinely pleased to see them again. Well, if it isn't my favorite customers, she said warmly. Back for more of those famous pancakes? Actually, the man said with a slight smile, we were hoping to try whatever you recommend. The girls haven't stopped talking about this place since Monday night. We told everyone at school about the best waitress ever, Sophia announced proudly. And about the cloud pancakes, Grace added. But nobody believed us about the clouds part. Tiana laughed, settling into easy conversation with the girls while their father watched with obvious affection. She learned that Sophia loved horses and wanted to be a veterinarian, while Grace preferred books and dreamed of writing stories about princesses who saved themselves. Both girls attended St. Margaret's Academy, an expensive private school across town. What brings you all the way over here for dinner? Tiana asked casually. That's quite a drive from your neighborhood. The man shifted uncomfortably. We're staying nearby temporarily. Just until some things get sorted out. Something in his tone told Tiana not to push further. Everyone had their reasons for ending up at Murphy's Diner, and most of those reasons weren't happy ones. Well, for tonight, how about I surprise you with our Thursday special? Chef makes an amazing meatloaf with garlic mashed potatoes, and I promise it's nothing like cafeteria food. The girls wrinkled their noses skeptically, but their father nodded. That sounds perfect. And coffee for me. 2 chocolate milks for the ladies? Yes, please, both girls chorused. As Tiana walked away to place their order, she overheard their conversation. Daddy, why do you always look sad when you check your phone? Grace asked with childlike directness. I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking about work stuff. Adult work stuff is boring, Sophia declared. You should smile more like when we're here. Yeah, Grace agreed. The nice waitress makes you smile. She's pretty too. Girls, their father said gently, but Tiana caught the warmth in his voice. She busied herself preparing their drinks, trying not to eavesdrop but unable to ignore their sweet chatter. These girls were something special and their father clearly adored them. The way he listened to their every word, asked thoughtful questions about their day, and made them feel heard reminded her of her own father before he passed away 10 years ago. When she returned with the milkshakes and coffee, the girls immediately launched into a detailed account of their school day. Sophia had won a spelling bee, and Grace had finished reading a chapter book about dragons. Their father listened with complete attention, celebrating their small victories like they were Olympic medals. "You two are incredibly smart," Tiana said, setting down their drinks. "Your dad must be very proud." "He's the best daddy in the world," Sophia said loyally. "Even when he burns pancakes," Grace added with a giggle. Their father's cheeks flushed slightly. "I'm working on my cooking skills. It's harder than it looks." "Maybe the nice lady could teach you," Grace suggested innocently. "She knows how to make everything taste good." "Grace," he warned gently, but his eyes met Tiana's with something that looked like curiosity mixed with embarrassment. The food arrived quickly, and Tiana watched with satisfaction as the family enjoyed their meal. The girls demolished their meat loaf after initial skepticism, and their father actually cleaned his plate, something she rarely saw from the stressed-looking customers who wandered in late at night. "This was incredible," he said when she came to check on them. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal this good in months." "Chef will be thrilled to hear that. He takes a lot of pride in his Thursday special." "Can we come back tomorrow?" Sophia asked hopefully. "If your dad doesn't mind the drive," Tiana replied. "Actually," he said slowly, "we don't mind at all. This place has become something of a bright spot in our week." When it came time to pay, he once again tried to leave a generous tip, but Tiana gently pushed back some of the bills. "This is too much," she protested. "For excellent service and making my daughters feel special? It's not nearly enough." As they prepared to leave, both girls hugged Tiana goodbye again, a ritual that was apparently becoming standard. But this time as she bent down to their level, Grace whispered something that made her freeze. "He's my dad," Grace said quietly, glancing back at the man who was putting on his coat. "Please marry him." Before Tiana could respond, Sophia grabbed her other hand and whispered urgently, "We don't have a mommy anymore. But we really like you. You make the best food and you're really nice to Daddy." Tiana's heart clenched. These little girls had lost their mother, and they were trying to fix their father's loneliness in the most innocent way possible. She knelt down to their eye level, speaking softly so their father couldn't hear. "You two are the sweetest girls I've ever met," she said gently. "Your daddy is lucky to have daughters who love him so much. But these things are complicated, okay? Will you think about it?" Grace asked hopefully. "Just think about it," Sophia echoed. Before Tiana could answer, their father appeared beside them. "Girls ready to go?" They nodded, but both gave Tiana meaningful looks as they headed for the door. The man paused at the entrance, turning back with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you again," he said. "For everything. This place, it feels like home." After they left, Tiana stood in the middle of the empty diner, her mind racing. These little girls thought they could simply ask her to marry their father, as if love worked like ordering from a menu. The innocent request should have been amusing, but instead, it broke her heart. She thought about the sadness in the man's eyes, the way he lit up when his daughters laughed, the careful way he spoke about their temporary living situation. He was clearly going through something difficult just like she was. Maybe that's why she felt drawn to help them, why their happiness mattered to her even though they were strangers. Her phone buzzed with another urgent message from the hospital billing department. Reality rushed back, reminding her that she had her own battles to fight. She couldn't afford to get attached to customers, no matter how sweet their children were or how kind their eyes looked when they smiled. But as she cleaned their table and found a small drawing Grace had left behind, a picture of 3 stick figures labeled Daddy, Grace, and Nice Lady, she couldn't help wondering what it would be like to be part of a family again. To have someone worry about her the way those girls worried about their father. To have someone light up when she walked into a room. She folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket, next to the eviction notice that reminded her why fairy tales weren't real life. Outside, snow continued to fall, and Tiana wondered what secrets the mysterious family was hiding. The weekend brought an unexpected surprise when Jonathan Brooks, though Tiana still didn't know his name, appeared at the diner on Saturday morning with both girls in tow. This was different from their usual evening visits, and the girls seemed practically vibrating with excitement as they slid into their regular booth. "Morning shift today?" he asked with a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Someone called in sick," Tiana replied, pouring fresh coffee into his mug. But I don't mind. Gives me extra hours. What she didn't say was that she desperately needed those extra hours. The second notice from her landlord had arrived yesterday, and she was now less than 24 hours away from eviction. Her grandmother's condition had stabilized, thank God, but the medical bills kept coming like ocean waves, each one threatening to pull her under completely. Can we have pancakes again? Sophia asked, bouncing slightly in her seat. With extra syrup? Grace added hopefully. I think that can be arranged, Tiana said, ruffling Grace's hair affectionately. And what would Dad like this morning? Just coffee and whatever you recommend, he said, settling back to watch his daughters with obvious contentment. I trust your judgment completely. There was something different about him today. The constant tension in his shoulders had eased somewhat, and he wasn't checking his phone every few minutes. Whatever crisis had been consuming him seemed to have improved, at least temporarily. As Tiana walked away to place their order, she couldn't help but notice the girls whispering intensely to each other, shooting glances in her direction and giggling behind their hands. When she returned with their drinks, they immediately straightened up with suspicious innocence. Are you married? Sophia asked bluntly, causing her father to nearly choke on his coffee. Sophia, he said firmly. That's not an appropriate question to ask. But we need to know, Grace protested. For our project. What project? Tiana asked, genuinely curious. The girls exchanged a meaningful look that was far too mature for 7-year-olds. A school project, Grace said carefully. About different types of families. Tiana sensed there was more to this story, but she played along. Well, I'm not married. Never have been. I live with my grandmother, so I guess that makes us a family of 2. See? Sophia said triumphantly to her sister. I told you she was available. Available for what? Their father asked suspiciously. Nothing, both girls said quickly, but their guilty expressions suggested otherwise. Tiana excused herself to check on their food, but she could hear fragments of their whispered conversation from the kitchen window. Phase 1 is complete, Grace was saying seriously. Now we need to move to Phase 2. What's Phase 2 again? Sophia asked. We make them spend more time together. Remember what Mrs. Henderson said about her daughter meeting her husband? They had to be friends first. But how do we make them be friends? We ask her to teach Daddy how to cook, Grace said with the confidence of a military strategist. Then they have to spend time together and maybe they'll fall in love like in the movies. Their father's voice cut through their plotting. Girls, whatever you're whispering about, stop it right now. I mean it. When Tiana returned with their breakfast, the girls were sitting with their hands folded, looking like angels who had never plotted anything in their lives. But she caught the way they watched her interaction with their father, cataloging every smile and laugh like they were taking notes. These look amazing, he said, cutting into his pancakes. You've spoiled us for anywhere else. That's the plan, Tiana replied playfully. Keep customers coming back with superior pancakes and mediocre coffee. The coffee's not mediocre, he protested with mock offense. You're just being polite because you're a gentleman. Something flickered in his eyes at the word gentleman, and Tiana wondered if she'd touched on something significant. Before she could analyze it further, Grace spoke up with studied casualness. Do you know how to cook, Miss Tiana? I know the basics. Why do you ask? Because Daddy really needs help, Sophia said earnestly. He tried to make scrambled eggs yesterday and they turned into yellow rubber. They were not rubber, he protested, but his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Could you teach him? Grace asked innocently. Maybe after work sometime? We could pay you. Girls, their father said with a warning tone. It's okay, Tiana said quickly. But I'm sure your dad is just out of practice. Cooking is like anything else, it gets easier with repetition. See, Sophia said to her father. She said it gets easier. You just need someone to show you. The man looked mortified by his daughter's transparency, but Tiana found their matchmaking attempts endearing rather than annoying. These little girls had decided she belonged in their lives, and they were going about making it happen with the single-minded determination only children possessed. Maybe we could start with something simple, she found herself saying. Pancakes aren't actually that hard once you know the trick. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Are you serious? Dead serious. The secret is not overmixing the batter and keeping the heat at medium-low. Most people rush it. Would you really be willing to teach me? He asked, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made her chest tighten. If you want to learn, I'd be happy to help. The girls exchanged triumphant glances that their father completely missed, but Tiana caught every bit of their silent celebration. These two were definitely up to something, and she was apparently a central part of their plan. After breakfast, as the family prepared to leave, the girls performed their usual goodbye hugs. But this time their whispers were different. "Thank you," Grace breathed against her ear. "Phase 2 is working perfectly." "He really likes you," Sophia added. "I can tell because he smiles different when you're here." Before Tiana could respond, they skipped away to join their father, who was leaving another generous tip despite her continued protests. "About the cooking lessons," he said quietly. "I meant it. The girls are right, I'm hopeless in the kitchen, and they deserve better than takeout every night. When would work for you?" Tiana heard herself ask. "I know you must be busy, but maybe Sunday evening? I could pick up groceries and we could use my kitchen. It's better equipped than most restaurant kitchens." The casual mention of a well-equipped kitchen reinforced Tiana's growing suspicion that this family had money, despite their current living situation being temporary. But she pushed the thought aside. "Sunday works," she agreed. "But you're not paying me. Consider it a favor between friends." The word friends seemed to hang in the air between them, loaded with possibility and hope. The girls beamed like they'd just won the lottery. After they left, Tiana realized she'd just agreed to spend her only day off teaching a virtual stranger how to cook in his apartment, while his matchmaking daughters watched and probably plotted their next move. The smart thing would be to call him and cancel, to maintain professional boundaries and focus on her own problems. Instead, she found herself looking forward to Sunday evening, wondering what other secrets this mysterious family was hiding, and trying not to think about how good it felt to be needed by someone other than her sick grandmother. The girls' plan was working better than they could have imagined, and Tiana was too charmed by their innocence to realize she was being expertly maneuvered into their father's life one pancake lesson at a time. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of bone-deep cold that made Chicago residents question their life choices. Tiana stood outside the address Jonathan had given her, staring up at the gleaming glass tower that definitely wasn't a temporary apartment building. The doorman nodded politely as she approached, as if beautiful young black women in worn winter coats visited the penthouse regularly. "I'm here to see Jonathan Brooks," she said, trying to keep the surprise out of her voice. "Of course. He's expecting you. Top floor." The elevator ride gave her time to process what she was walking into. Jonathan Brooks wasn't just comfortable, he was wealthy. Really wealthy. The kind of wealthy that made her wonder why he'd been so careful about money that first night at the diner, why he'd seemed genuinely moved by her small act of kindness. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling penthouse that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Chicago skyline, and the kitchen alone was bigger than her entire apartment. But what caught her attention immediately were the girls, who rushed toward her like she was their favorite aunt returning from a long trip. "You came," Grace said, hugging her tightly. "We weren't sure you'd really come," Sophia added, wrapping her arms around Tiana's waist. "I keep my promises," Tiana said, hugging them back while trying to reconcile the modest family from the diner with this obvious display of wealth. Jonathan appeared from the kitchen, looking oddly nervous despite being in his own home. He traded his suit for dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes look warmer, more approachable. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because this is crazy," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "Asking a waitress to teach me basic life skills in my own kitchen. Most people would think I've lost my mind." "Good thing I'm not most people," Tiana replied, looking around the impressive space. "This kitchen is incredible. You could cook for an army in here. If I knew how to cook for one person, maybe I could work my way up to an army." The girls giggled at their father's joke, and Tiana felt some of the awkwardness fade. Whatever his financial situation, Jonathan was still the same gentle father she'd watched dote on his daughters at the diner. "Okay, Master Chef," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Show me what you've got to work with." The next 2 hours flew by in a whirlwind of flour, laughter, and patient instruction. Tiana guided Jonathan through making pancake batter from scratch, explaining each step while the girls provided running commentary from their perch at the kitchen island. "Don't overmix," Tiana said, catching his hand as he started to stir vigorously. "See how there are still little lumps? That's perfect. Smooth batter makes tough pancakes." Her hand covering his sent an unexpected jolt through both of them. Jonathan's stirring slowed, and for a moment, they stood closer than necessary, her guiding his movements while something electric hummed between them. "Like this?" he asked quietly, his voice slightly rough. "Exactly like that." "Daddy, you're making googly eyes," Sophia announced matter-of-factly. "Googly eyes." Jonathan stepped back quickly, his face flushing. You know, like when Prince Eric looks at Ariel in the movie, Grace explained helpfully. All swoony and romantic. I do not make googly eyes, Jonathan protested, but his embarrassment only made the girls giggle more. Tiana busied herself heating the griddle, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest. She was here to teach cooking, not to analyze the way Jonathan's smile made her stomach flutter or how natural it felt to be in this beautiful kitchen with this sweet family. First pancake is always a test, she explained, pouring batter onto the hot surface. You're looking for bubbles to form on the surface before you flip. How do you know when it's ready? Jonathan asked, moving to stand beside her again. The bubbles will pop and leave little holes and the edges will look set. See? She demonstrated the flip with practiced ease, revealing a perfectly golden pancake underneath. The girls cheered like she'd performed magic. Now you try, she said, handing Jonathan the spatula. His first attempt was clumsy but successful. The second was better. By the fourth pancake he was flipping with confidence while Tiana watched with genuine pride. Look at you, Master Chef, she teased. Your daughters are going to eat like queens. We already do, Grace said loyally. Daddy orders from the best restaurants. But now he can make breakfast too, Sophia added. That's very important for a husband. Sophia, Jonathan warned, but he was smiling. What? Mrs. Henderson says a man who can cook is very attractive to ladies. Tiana laughed despite herself. Mrs. Henderson sounds like a wise woman. She's our nanny, Grace explained. She takes care of us when Daddy has to work late, which is almost every day. Something shifted in Jonathan's expression. Not every day, he said quietly. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and sometimes Friday, Sophia counted on her fingers. That's 5 days. And sometimes Saturday, Grace added. The pride in Jonathan's face dimmed, replaced by something that looked like guilt. Tiana sensed this was a source of conflict for him, the balance between providing for his daughters and actually being present in their lives. Well, she said brightly, now you can make them pancakes on Saturday mornings. That's better than any restaurant. You think so? I know so. Food tastes better when it's made with love. Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away quickly. The girls watched this exchange with obvious satisfaction, as if everything was proceeding according to their master plan. They ate their pancakes at the kitchen island, the girls chattering about school while Jonathan asked Tiana careful questions about her life. She found herself sharing stories about growing up with her grandmother, about putting herself through nursing school, about her dreams of working in pediatric care someday. Nursing school must be expensive, he said carefully. Everything's expensive, Tiana replied with a shrug. But Grandma Rose always says that education is the one thing nobody can take away from you. She sounds like an amazing woman. She is. She raised me after my parents died, worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, never complained once. She's the strongest person I know. Jonathan's expression grew thoughtful. It must be hard balancing work and school and taking care of her. We take care of each other, Tiana said simply. That's what family does. The words hung in the air, and Tiana realized she'd revealed more than she intended. But something about this kitchen, this family, made her feel safe enough to be honest. Can Miss Tiana come back next week? Grace asked suddenly. To teach you how to make something else? Girls, Miss Tiana has her own life, Jonathan said gently. She can't spend every Sunday teaching me to cook. But Tiana surprised herself by saying, I wouldn't mind. If you want to learn more, I mean. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't poison these angels with your cooking experiments. The girls erupted in giggles and Jonathan smiled with genuine warmth. In that case, I'd love to continue the lessons. As the evening wound down, Tiana helped clean up the kitchen while the girls did homework at the dining room table. Jonathan worked beside her, their movements developing an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. The girls haven't been this happy in a long time. What happened to their mother? Tiana asked gently. If you don't mind me asking. Jonathan's hands stilled in the soapy water. Cancer. 2 years ago. It was difficult. The simple words carried so much pain that Tiana's heart ached for all of them. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. The girls handled it better than I did, honestly. Children are resilient in ways adults never are. And you've been raising them alone since then? With help from Mrs. Henderson, yes. But lately I feel like I'm failing them. Working too much, relying too heavily on takeout and nannies. They deserve better. They deserve a father who loves them, Tiana said firmly. Which you clearly do. The rest is just details. Jonathan looked at her with something close to wonder. You really believe that? I know that. I see how they look at you, how they talk about you. You're their hero, Jonathan. Don't let guilt convince you otherwise. It was the first time she'd used his name and they both noticed. The intimacy of it settled between them like a shared secret. When it came time to leave, the girls insisted on walking her to the elevator, both clinging to her hands like they were afraid she might disappear. Will you really come back next week? Grace asked anxiously. I promise, Tiana said, meaning it completely. What will you teach Daddy next? Sophia wanted to know. Maybe scrambled eggs. The non-rubber kind. Both girls dissolved into giggles, and Jonathan appeared beside them, holding Tiana's coat. Let me drive you home, he offered. It's late and it's cold. I can take the bus, Tiana protested automatically. Please. It's the least I can do after you spent your whole evening making me a better father. The ride to her neighborhood was comfortable, filled with easy conversation about the girls' school activities and Tiana's nursing program. But as they pulled up to her building, a run-down complex in a part of town that clearly made Jonathan uncomfortable, reality crashed back down. This is me, she said quickly, reaching for the door handle. Tiana, Jonathan said softly. Thank you. For tonight, for the pancakes at the diner, for being kind to my daughters. You've given us something we didn't even know we were missing. Their eyes met in the dim light of the car, and for a moment, Tiana thought he might lean closer, might close the distance between them. Instead, he smiled gently and waited until she was safely inside before driving away. Upstairs, her grandmother was waiting with knowing eyes and a cup of tea. How was your cooking lesson? Rose asked innocently. It was fine. Just teaching someone how to make pancakes. Must have been some pancakes to put that glow in your cheeks. Tiana touched her face self-consciously. I don't know what you mean. Baby girl, I've been watching people fall in love for 73 years. I know the signs. Grandma, it's not like that. He's just a customer from the diner. A friend. Rose said with a smile. And I suppose this friend doesn't have anything to do with why you've been humming while you fold laundry. Tiana couldn't deny the humming, so she kissed her grandmother's forehead and escaped to her room. But as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Jonathan's gentle hands learning to flip pancakes, about Grace and Sophia's innocent matchmaking, about the way it felt to be part of a family again, even for just one evening. She was in dangerous territory, developing feelings for a man whose world was so different from hers that it might as well be another planet. But those little girls had whispered their hopes directly into her heart, and Jonathan's grateful smile had made her feel like she mattered in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Tomorrow she'd go back to the diner, back to reality, back to worrying about bills and her grandmother's health. But tonight, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if Grace and Sophia's matchmaking actually worked. If fairy tales sometimes came true for waitresses who gave away free pancakes to strangers. Outside her window, the city sparkled with possibility, and for the first time in months, Tiana fell asleep smiling. Monday morning brought a crisis that shattered Tiana's brief moment of happiness like glass hitting concrete. She arrived at the diner to find her manager, Pete, waiting with a grim expression and an envelope that made her stomach drop before he even spoke. Tiana, I'm sorry but I have to cut your hours, he said without preamble. Corporate's breathing down my neck about labor costs and you're still technically part-time. The envelope contained her new schedule, 3 shifts instead of 6, her income slashed by more than half just when she needed every penny. Tiana stared at the paper, calculating rapidly in her head. Even with tips, she'd be lucky to make $400 this week. Pete, I need those hours, she said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. Can't you cut someone else? You know I would if I could, kid. But Jenny's got seniority, and Marcus has been full-time for 3 years. My hands are tied. Tiana nodded numbly, understanding the business reality even as it felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. She tucked the schedule into her apron pocket next to the eviction notice that was now inevitable rather than just threatening. The lunch shift crawled by in a haze of anxiety. Every customer who left a small tip felt like another nail in her coffin. Every check she rang up reminded her of the money she wouldn't be earning the rest of the week. By the time her shortened shift ended at 3, she was fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Her phone rang as she was walking to the bus stop, and her heart skipped when she saw it was Jonathan. They'd exchanged numbers the night before, though she hadn't expected him to use it so soon. Hi, she answered, trying to sound normal. Hey, I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to thank you again for last night. The girls are already planning what they want me to cook for them next weekend. Despite everything, Tiana smiled. Let me guess, chocolate chip cookies? How did you know? Lucky guess. Did you manage breakfast this morning without burning down the kitchen? Barely. I definitely need more practice before I attempt anything ambitious. There was a comfortable pause, and then Jonathan's voice became more serious. Tiana, I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime. Just the two of us. I know a place that serves food almost as good as Murphy's Diner. The invitation sent warmth flooding through her chest, followed immediately by crushing reality. How could she explain that she couldn't afford to eat at whatever restaurant he had in mind, that her nicest outfit was the black dress she wore to church on Sundays, that she was about to be homeless? I'd like that, she heard herself say, but this week is really complicated. Work stuff. Of course. Maybe next week then? Maybe. After they hung up, Tiana sat at the bus stop and let herself imagine just for a moment what it would be like to say yes. To get dressed up and go somewhere beautiful with a man who looked at her like she mattered, who made her laugh, whose daughters had already decided she belonged in their lives. The fantasy lasted exactly until she got home and found her grandmother collapsed on the kitchen floor. Grandma Rose, Tiana cried, dropping to her knees beside the older woman. Rose was conscious but pale, her breathing shallow and labored. My chest, she whispered. Started hurting about an hour ago. Tiana called 911 with shaking hands, then spent the longest 15 minutes of her life holding her grandmother's hand and trying to stay calm. The paramedics arrived with efficient professionalism, loading Rose onto a stretcher while firing questions about her medical history and current medications. At the hospital, Tiana sat in the waiting room clutching her grandmother's purse and trying not to think about how much this ambulance ride was going to cost. Dr. Martinez, Rose's cardiologist, finally emerged after 2 hours with news that was both relieving and terrifying. She's stable, he said without preamble. But we need to schedule surgery as soon as possible. The valve replacement we've been discussing can't wait any longer. How soon? Tiana asked. Within the next 2 weeks. Maybe sooner if we have a cancellation. And the cost? Dr. Martinez's expression softened with sympathy. Even with her Medicare, you're looking at about $15,000 in co-pays and related expenses. I'm sorry, I know that's a difficult number. $15,000. Tiana nodded and thanked him, then walked numbly back to her grandmother's room where Rose was sleeping peacefully, monitors beeping steadily around her. $15,000 when she just lost half her income and was facing eviction in 48 hours. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. Her credit was too damaged from previous medical bills to qualify for a loan. The hospital's financial assistance program had a 6-week waiting period. Her nursing school advisor was sympathetic but couldn't offer anything beyond payment plan options that would take 5 years to complete. By evening, Rose was awake and alert, scolding Tiana for looking so worried. Baby girl, you can't fix everything, she said gently. Some things are in God's hands. I can't lose you, Grandma. I won't. You won't lose me. But you can't sacrifice your whole life trying to save mine. Promise me you won't drop out of school. Tiana couldn't make that promise, not when her grandmother's life hung in the balance. She stayed at the hospital until visiting hours ended, then took the bus back to their apartment to gather some of Rose's things for her extended stay. The eviction notice was still there when she walked in, unchanged and immovable. Tomorrow was the deadline, and she had nowhere near enough money to stop it. She could probably stay with her friend Kesha for a few days, but that wouldn't solve the bigger problem. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Hope your work situation gets better. The girls are already asking when you can come back for another cooking lesson. Tiana stared at the message for a long time. Here was a man with more money than she could imagine, whose children adored her, who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her better. A man who could solve all her problems with what was probably pocket change to him. But she couldn't ask. Wouldn't ask. She'd watched her grandmother work 2 jobs and sacrifice everything to maintain their dignity and independence. Taking charity from a man she barely knew, no matter how kind he seemed, would betray everything Rose had taught her about standing on her own feet. Instead she texted back, thanks. Might need to postpone Sunday's lesson. Family emergency. His response came quickly, is there anything I can do to help? Tiana typed and deleted a dozen responses. Yes, you could pay for my grandmother's surgery and cover my rent and make all my problems disappear. Yes, you could rescue me like the prince in the fairy tales your daughters love so much. Yes, you could make everything okay with a signature on a check. Finally she sent, thanks but we'll be fine. Talk soon. She turned off her phone and sat in the dark apartment, surrounded by 17 years of memories and 24 hours away from losing it all. Tomorrow she'd have to tell her grandmother they were being evicted. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out how to pay for life-saving surgery with money she didn't have. Tomorrow she'd have to decide whether to drop out of school and pick up extra shifts somewhere, anywhere that would pay enough to matter. But tonight, she allowed herself one more moment to imagine what it might have been like if Grace and Sophia's matchmaking had happened to someone else, someone whose life wasn't falling apart one crisis at a time. Someone who deserved the happiness that seemed to sparkle just out of reach, like city lights reflected on water, beautiful but untouchable. Outside, Chicago hummed with the lives of 8 million people, and Tiana had never felt more alone. Tuesday morning arrived with the inevitability of a funeral. Tiana stood outside her apartment building at 8 a.m. sharp, watching the sheriff's deputy post the final eviction notice on her door. 24 hours to vacate, effective immediately. Her neighbor Mrs. Chen offered awkward sympathy and the phone number of a cousin who might have a couch available for a few nights. Just temporary, Mrs. Chen assured her. Until you get back on your feet. Tiana thanked her and walked to the hospital, carrying a suitcase with her grandmother's clothes and a heart full of dread. How do you tell someone recovering from a heart episode that they're now homeless? How do you explain that the safe haven they've shared for 17 years is gone? Rose took the news with the stoic grace she'd shown through every crisis in their lives together. We'll figure it out, baby girl, she said calmly. We always do. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I should have found a way. Stop that right now. You've been carrying this family since you were 15 years old. You're not responsible for everything that goes wrong. But Tiana felt responsible. She was the one who was supposed to be strong, supposed to find solutions, supposed to keep their small world from falling apart. She was failing at the one job that mattered most. The morning crawled by with insurance calls and discharge planning meetings. Rose would need another 3 days in the hospital before she could be released, which gave Tiana time to find temporary housing but didn't solve the bigger problems looming ahead. At noon, she took a break to grab coffee from the hospital cafeteria and found herself sitting next to a rack of magazines. The cover of Business Weekly made her freeze mid-sip. Tech titan Jonathan Brooks announces major expansion, blazed across the front, above a professional photo of a man in an expensive suit. Her Jonathan. The gentle father who burned pancakes and worried about working too much. The man whose daughters whispered about finding him a wife while he blushed and protested their matchmaking attempts. With trembling hands, she bought the magazine and found a quiet corner to read. The article painted a picture of incredible success. Brooks Technologies, a software company worth over $2 billion. Jonathan Brooks, CEO and founder, one of Chicago's youngest billionaires. Recent struggles following his wife's death, but the company continued to thrive under his leadership. $2 billion. Billionaire. The words swam on the page as pieces clicked into place. The penthouse apartment. The expensive suits. The way he'd hesitated over an $18 dinner check that first night, not because he couldn't afford it, but because he was testing something, maybe even testing her. Tiana felt sick. She'd been playing house with one of the richest men in America while her own life crumbled around her. She taught him to make pancakes in a kitchen that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. She'd accepted his gratitude and kindness while he lived in a world so far removed from hers that they might as well have been different species. Worse, she'd started to develop real feelings for him. Had begun to imagine that the connection between them was genuine, that his interest went beyond amusement at the quaint waitress who'd shown his family a moment of kindness. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Girls are asking if you're okay. Is everything all right with your family emergency? Tiana stared at the message, remembering Grace and Sophia's innocent faces, their whispered hopes that she might become their new mother. Did they know who their father was? Did they understand that their matchmaking efforts were pairing a billionaire with a woman about to be homeless? She couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't pretend they existed in the same world, couldn't let those sweet girls get more attached to someone who had no business being in their lives. The revelation felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs and leaving her gasping with humiliation. Instead of responding to Jonathan's text, she called Murphy's Diner. Pete, it's Tiana. I need more shifts. Any shifts. I'll work doubles, I'll cover for anyone who calls in sick, anything you've got. Thought you were happy with your current schedule. Things changed. I need the money. Pete's voice softened with understanding. Okay kid. I'll see what I can do. Jenny mentioned wanting next Sunday off, and Marcus has been asking about vacation time. Maybe I can shuffle things around. Thank you. I really appreciate it. You're a good worker, Tiana. One of the best I've got. Things will turn around. After they hung up, Tiana sat in the hospital corridor and tried to figure out how to extricate herself from the Brooks family's life without hurting Grace and Sophia. They didn't deserve to be casualties of her wounded pride and embarrassment. Her phone rang, and this time it was Jonathan himself. "Hi," she answered reluctantly. "Hey, I was worried when you didn't respond to my text. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Just busy." There was a pause. "You don't sound fine." "Tiana, what's wrong?" The concern in his voice almost broke her resolve. It would be so easy to tell him everything, to let him swoop in and solve her problems with the casual generosity billionaires probably showed their favorite charities. But that's all she would be to him. A charity case, a feel-good story he could tell at dinner parties about helping the struggling waitress. "Nothing's wrong. I just think maybe we should slow things down a bit." "Slow things down? I don't understand." "The cooking lessons, the dinners, all of it. I think it's getting a little too complicated." "Complicated how?" His voice was careful now, guarded. Tiana closed her eyes and forced herself to say the words that would end this before it could become something worse. "I just think we're from different worlds, Jonathan. Maybe it's better if we keep things simple. Professional." The silence stretched so long she wondered if he'd hung up. "I see," he said finally, his voice flat. "If that's what you want." "It is." "What about Sunday's cooking lesson?" The girls have been looking forward to it all week. The mention of Grace and Sophia made her heart clench. "Maybe Mrs. Henderson could teach you instead. I'm sure she knows her way around a kitchen." "Right. Of course." Another pause. "Can I ask what changed? Yesterday you seemed happy about continuing the lessons." "I just realized it wasn't a good idea. That's all." "Okay." His voice was professionally polite now, the warmth completely gone. "I'll tell the girls something came up. Thank you for everything you've done for us, Tiana. I hope your family emergency works out." The line went dead, leaving Tiana staring at her phone and wondering why doing the right thing felt so much like breaking her own heart. That evening she moved her belongings to Kesha's cramped studio apartment, sleeping on an air mattress between the couch and the kitchen table. Rose called from the hospital to check on her, and Tiana lied smoothly about finding a great temporary place to stay. She didn't mention the magazine article or the revelation about Jonathan's wealth. She didn't explain why she turned down the cooking lessons or why she planned to avoid the diner shifts when the Brooks family usually visited. Some humiliations were too deep to share, even with the person who loved you most. Instead, she focused on practical matters. Picking up extra shifts, researching financial aid options for Rose's surgery, mapping out bus routes to apartments she might be able to afford once she got back on her feet. But late that night, lying on the air mattress in the dark, she couldn't stop thinking about Grace and Sophia's disappointed faces when their father explained that the nice waitress wouldn't be coming back. Couldn't stop wondering if Jonathan had any idea why she'd really withdrawn, or if he'd simply written her off as another person who'd taken what they wanted and moved on. The worst part was knowing that her pride had cost those little girls something they desperately wanted. The possibility of a mother who would love them unconditionally. She'd let her own embarrassment and fear destroy their innocent hopes, and that felt like the cruelest betrayal of all. Outside Kesha's window, the city continued its relentless rhythm, indifferent to one woman's heartbreak and a family's shattered fairy tale. Are you starting to see why Tiana made this heartbreaking decision? Do you think she was right to walk away, or should she have swallowed her pride? The story takes an even more emotional turn next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens when Jonathan discovers the real reason behind Tiana's sudden withdrawal. Share your thoughts in the comments about what you would have done in her situation. Jonathan stared at his phone for a long time after Tiana hung up, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Yesterday she'd been warm and engaged, talking about future cooking lessons and laughing at his clumsy attempts to flip pancakes. Today she was distant and formal, erecting walls he couldn't understand. "Daddy, why do you look sad again?" Grace asked, appearing in his office doorway with Sophia right behind her. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking." "About Miss Tiana?" Sophia asked hopefully. "Is she coming Sunday to teach you scrambled eggs?" Jonathan's chest tightened. How was he supposed to explain to his daughters that their matchmaking efforts had failed, that the woman they'd clearly fallen in love with had decided she wanted nothing to do with their family? "Miss Tiana is busy with her own life," he said carefully. "She won't be able to continue the cooking lessons." The girls' faces fell in perfect unison, their disappointment so profound it made Jonathan want to call Tiana back and beg her to reconsider. "But we liked her," Grace said quietly. "She made you smile," Sophia added, her lower lip trembling. "I know you liked her. I liked her too. But sometimes grown-up relationships are complicated." Did you make her mad? Grace asked with the directness that always caught him off guard. I don't think so. I hope not. Then why doesn't she want to see us anymore? It was the question Jonathan had been asking himself since the phone call ended. Tiana's withdrawal had been so sudden, so complete, that he kept replaying their last interaction looking for clues he might have missed. Had he pushed too hard with the dinner invitation? Had she felt pressured by his obvious interest? Maybe he'd misread the connection between them, projected his own growing feelings onto moments that meant nothing to her. Sometimes people realize they don't have time for new friendships, he told the girls, the explanation feeling hollow even as he said it. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Jonathan found himself driving toward Murphy's diner despite knowing it was a bad idea. He told himself he just wanted coffee, maybe pie, but the truth was he hoped to see Tiana, to understand what had changed so dramatically in the space of 24 hours. The diner was nearly empty when he arrived, just a few late-night customers scattered across the worn booths. But Tiana wasn't there. Jenny, the older waitress he'd seen before, approached his table with tired professionalism. What can I get you tonight? Just coffee, thanks. Is Tiana working tonight? Tiana? No, she's not on the schedule until Thursday. Can I get you anything else? Jonathan shook his head and left after one cup of coffee, feeling foolish for the expedition. Whatever was happening with Tiana, showing up at her workplace wasn't going to fix it. Thursday arrived with a board meeting that demanded his full attention, but Jonathan found his mind wandering throughout the presentations. Brooks Technologies was expanding into new markets, acquiring smaller companies, positioning itself for another record-breaking quarter. The numbers were impressive, the projections promising, but for the first time in his career, the business that had once consumed his every waking moment felt less important than understanding why a waitress he'd known for 2 weeks had suddenly decided he wasn't worth her time. Sir? His assistant, Patricia, was looking at him expectantly. The Peterson contract? Right. Yes, approve it. Jonathan refocused on the meeting, pushing thoughts of Tiana aside with the discipline that had built his empire. But that evening, after the girls were asleep, he made a decision that surprised him. Instead of reviewing quarterly reports or returning calls from investors, he drove back to Murphy's diner. This time Tiana was there. She stood behind the counter counting receipts, her usually bright demeanor replaced by something flat and mechanical. When she looked up and saw him, her expression didn't change, but her hands stilled on the register. Hi, Jonathan said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Hi. Coffee? The professional distance in her voice confirmed what he'd suspected. Whatever they'd been building had been deliberately dismantled. Please? And maybe an explanation. Tiana poured coffee with steady hands, not meeting his eyes. I don't know what you mean. You know exactly what I mean. Sunday night you were planning next week's lesson. Monday you decided we're from different worlds and shouldn't see each other anymore. I think I deserve to know what changed. Nothing changed. I just realized I was getting in over my head. Over your head how? Finally, she looked at him directly, and Jonathan was startled by the pain in her eyes. Jonathan, you seem like a really nice man, and your daughters are incredible. But I can't be someone's charity project. Charity project? The words hit him like a physical blow. Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? Rich guy feels sorry for struggling waitress, decides to help her out with some cooking lessons and generous tips. Jonathan stared at her, pieces clicking into place. You found out about the money. It wasn't a question, and Tiana's slight flinch confirmed his suspicion. Does it matter how I found out? It matters that you think money is the only reason I'd want to spend time with you. Isn't it? She challenged. Be honest, Jonathan. If I were some wealthy socialite from your neighborhood, would you have even noticed me that first night? The question hung between them, loaded with hurt and assumption. Jonathan chose his words carefully. If you were a wealthy socialite, you probably wouldn't have given my daughters free pancakes when you thought I couldn't afford them. You wouldn't have spent your only day off teaching a stranger to cook. You wouldn't have treated 2 scared little girls like they were the most important people in the world. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. I noticed you because of who you are, not despite your circumstances. The money has nothing to do with this. Tiana's laugh was bitter. Everything has to do with money when you don't have it. You live in a penthouse that probably costs more per month than I make in a year. You drop $20 tips on $18 meals without thinking twice. We don't exist in the same universe. So that's it? You're writing us off because I have money? I'm being realistic about the kind of person you date and the kind of person I am. The words stung because Jonathan knew there was truth in them. His social circle was narrow, exclusive, populated by people who'd never worried about rent or medical bills or choosing between groceries and gas money. But that didn't mean he was incapable of recognizing something real when he found it. What if I told you the money doesn't matter to me? I'd say that's easy to claim when you've never lived without it. Jonathan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right. He'd been born into privilege, educated at elite schools, launched his company with family connections and inherited seed money. He had no idea what it felt like to count every dollar, to choose between necessities, to have your entire world threatened by a missed paycheck. You're right, he said quietly. I don't understand your life. But I'd like to. Why? So you can feel better about yourself? So you can add helped poor waitress to your list of charitable activities. The accusation was unfair, but Jonathan heard the pain behind it. Tiana wasn't just rejecting him. She was protecting herself from what she saw as inevitable disappointment. Because I care about you, he said simply. Because my daughters light up when they talk about you. Because you make me remember what it feels like to be happy instead of just successful. For a moment, Tiana's professional mask slipped, revealing something vulnerable and longing. Then she rebuilt the walls with visible effort. I can't do this, Jonathan. I'm sorry. She turned away, busying herself with tasks that didn't need doing. Jonathan sat at the counter for another few minutes, hoping she'd change her mind, hoping the conversation could continue. But Tiana's silence was absolute, her back a barrier he couldn't cross. Finally, he left money on the counter and walked out, knowing he'd lost something precious without fully understanding how or why. The drive home was quiet, the city lights blurring past his windows like tears he was too proud to shed. He'd built a billion-dollar company, navigated hostile takeovers and complex negotiations, but he couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between his world and that of a woman who'd stolen his heart with her kindness and strength. At home, the penthouse felt emptier than usual. He checked on his sleeping daughters, remembering how excited they'd been about their matchmaking plan, how sure they'd been that Miss Tiana was exactly what their family needed. Maybe they'd been right. Maybe Tiana was exactly what they needed. But need wasn't enough if she couldn't see past the money to the man who just wanted to make pancakes with her on Sunday mornings and listen to her laugh at his daughter's silly jokes. For the first time since building his empire, Jonathan wondered if success had cost him something more valuable than he'd realized. 3 days after his conversation with Tiana at the diner, Jonathan was reviewing quarterly projections when Patricia knocked on his office door with an expression he'd learned to recognize. Someone was about to complicate his day. Sir, there's a call on line 2. Hospital billing department. They're asking about payment for a Rose Williams. Jonathan frowned. I don't know anyone by that name. They said they were told you'd authorized payment for her medical expenses. Heart surgery scheduled for next week. The pieces clicked together with sudden, painful clarity. Rose Williams. Tiana's grandmother, the woman who'd raised her and worked 2 jobs and was the strongest person Tiana knew. The family emergency that had made Tiana postpone their cooking lesson. Tell them there's been a mistake, Jonathan said carefully. Transfer the call to me. The conversation with the billing coordinator was brief and illuminating. Rose Williams needed valve replacement surgery. The family had been trying to arrange payment plans, but the patient's granddaughter had just called that morning to discuss postponing the procedure due to financial constraints. After he hung up, Jonathan sat in his office staring out at the Chicago skyline, understanding finally clicking into place. Tiana hadn't withdrawn because she'd discovered his wealth. She'd withdrawn because she was drowning, and her pride wouldn't let her ask for help. He thought about her careful words at the diner. Everything has to do with money when you don't have it. The pain in her eyes when she'd called herself a charity project. The way she'd flinched when he'd mentioned his money not matching. She wasn't rejecting him because of who he was. She was rejecting him because she couldn't reconcile needing help with wanting to be seen as an equal. Jonathan had built his fortune by recognizing opportunities others missed, by seeing solutions where others saw only problems. This was no different, except the stakes were higher than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. He called Patricia back into his office. I need you to contact Brooks Foundation and set up an anonymous donation, he said. Full payment for Rose Williams' medical expenses, plus additional funds for recovery and rehabilitation. How much are we talking about? Whatever it takes. And Patricia? Make sure it's completely anonymous. No connection to me or the company. Sir, if I may ask, who is Rose Williams? Jonathan considered the question. Someone who raised an extraordinary woman. Someone who deserves the chance to watch her granddaughter graduate nursing school. That evening he drove to Grace and Sophia's school to pick them up from aftercare, still thinking about how to help Tiana without making her feel like a charity case. The girls climbed into the car with their usual chatter about friends and homework, but their conversation soon turned to the topic that had dominated their thoughts all week. "Daddy, we've been thinking," Grace announced with the seriousness of a corporate boardroom. "About Miss Tiana," Sophia added. "We don't think she really wanted to stop being our friend." "What makes you say that?" "Because she looked sad when she hugged us goodbye last time," Grace explained. "Like she didn't want to let go. And she promised to come back," Sophia continued. "Miss Tiana doesn't break promises." Jonathan's heart clenched at their innocent faith. "Sometimes adult situations are more complicated than they seem, girls." "But what if she's in trouble?" Grace asked. "What if she needs help but she's too proud to ask?" The question hit closer to home than his 7-year-old daughter could possibly know. What would you do if someone you cared about needed help but was too proud to ask for it? He found himself asking. The girls exchanged one of their telepathic twin looks before Sophia answered. "We'd help them anyway. Without them knowing it was us." "Like when you secretly paid for Tommy Chen's lunch when his mom forgot to send money?" Grace added, referencing an incident from the previous year. "That was different," Jonathan protested. "No, it wasn't," both girls said simultaneously with the confidence of children who saw the world in clear moral terms. That night, after the girls were asleep, Jonathan made several more phone calls. To a real estate contact who owed him a favor. To the director of the hospital's financial aid program. To his lawyer about setting up additional anonymous trusts. If Tiana's pride wouldn't let her accept help directly, he'd find ways to help that she couldn't trace back to him. He couldn't force her to want a relationship with him, but he could remove the financial obstacles that were destroying her life. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The anonymous donation appeared in Rose Williams' hospital account, covering not just the surgery but all related expenses. A mysterious benefactor had also paid 3 months of back rent on Tiana's apartment, allowing her to move back in immediately. When Tiana received the call from the hospital billing department, she was folding laundry at Kesha's apartment, trying to figure out how to tell her grandmother that the surgery would have to wait another month while she saved more money. "Miss Williams? This is Janet from Chicago General's billing department. I'm calling about your grandmother's surgery." Tiana's stomach dropped. "If it's about the payment plan, I can have the first installment by Friday." "Actually, that's not why I'm calling. Your grandmother's account has been paid in full by an anonymous donor. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning as planned." The phone slipped from Tiana's nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. Kesha looked up from her laptop with concern. "Tiana? What's wrong?" With shaking hands, Tiana picked up the phone. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "An anonymous charitable foundation has covered all medical expenses for Rose Williams. Surgery, recovery, rehabilitation, follow-up care. Everything." "I don't understand. Who would do that?" "I'm sorry, but the donation was made with a strict anonymity clause. I can't provide any details about the donor." After she hung up, Tiana sat in stunned silence while Kesha peppered her with questions. Anonymous donor. It had to be Jonathan. No one else had the money or the motivation to pay for a stranger's surgery. But how had he found out about Rose's condition? And why would he help after she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him? The call from her landlord came an hour later, equally bewildering. "Miss Williams, I'm calling about your apartment. The back rent has been paid and you can move back in immediately." "Paid by whom?" "Some kind of community assistance program. They said you've been selected based on financial need and community service." "Congratulations." Community assistance program. Another anonymous benefactor. Another impossibly convenient solution to her desperate situation. Tiana's hands shook as she called the hospital to check on her grandmother. Rose was being prepped for surgery, calm and confident now that the procedure was finally happening. "They told me about the donation," Rose said when Tiana arrived. "God works in mysterious ways, baby girl." "Grandma, I think I know who did this." "Does it matter? Someone saw our need and chose to help. That's a blessing, not a burden." "But I can't just accept charity." "It's not charity if it's given with love," Rose interrupted gently. "And whoever did this, they love somebody in this room enough to make sure I get better." The surgery took 4 hours. Tiana paced the waiting room, alternating between gratitude and guilt, between relief and confusion. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged with news that the procedure had been completely successful, she broke down crying in the middle of the corridor. Rose would recover fully. The financial crisis was over. She could move back into their apartment, continue nursing school, focus on her grandmother's rehabilitation instead of drowning in debt. All because someone had decided she was worth helping. That evening, she sat in their apartment, their home, and stared at her phone. She owed Jonathan a thank you, assuming it had been him. But how do you thank someone for changing your entire life? How do you express gratitude that goes beyond words? More importantly, how do you reconcile accepting help with the fierce independence you'd built your identity around? Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. It was Jonathan. "Hi," she answered uncertainly. "I heard about your grandmother's surgery," he said without preamble. "How did it go?" "How did you hear about?" She stopped herself. "It went perfectly. She's going to be fine." "I'm so glad. You must be relieved." "Jonathan, did I what?" She could hear something carefully neutral in his voice, as if he'd prepared for this conversation. "The anonymous donation. The rent payment. Was that you?" "Tiana, I have no idea what you're talking about." The lie was gentle but obvious. Jonathan was many things, but he wasn't a good liar. "You can't just pay for people's lives," she said quietly. "I'm not sure what you mean. If someone helped your family, isn't that a good thing? Not if it comes with strings attached. Not if it makes me obligated to." "What strings?" His voice was sharper now. "What obligation?" "Someone, whoever it was, helped because they wanted to help. No strings, no expectations, no quid pro quo. There are always strings. Not this time." The certainty in his voice made her chest tight. "Why?" she whispered. "Why what? Why would someone do this? Why would they help strangers?" Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Maybe because they know what it's like to feel helpless. Maybe because they've learned that money is only meaningful if you use it to make the world a little bit better. Maybe because they care about someone who was drowning and didn't know how to ask for a life preserver. Tears spilled down Tiana's cheeks. "I can't accept this. It's already done. Your grandmother is healthy, your rent is paid, your life is back on track. You can't give any of that back, so what's the alternative?" "I don't know." "Then maybe just say thank you and let yourself be happy." "To who?" "If I don't know who helped, thank whoever you pray to. Thank the universe. Thank the kindness of strangers. But don't torture yourself with guilt over being helped when you needed it most." After they hung up, Tiana sat in her grandmother's favorite chair and cried. Relief, gratitude, confusion, and something that might have been love all mixed together until she couldn't tell one emotion from another. Someone had saved her life. Someone had given her back her future, her hope, her family's security. And whether that someone was Jonathan Brooks or a genuine anonymous benefactor, they'd done it without asking for anything in return. Maybe Rose was right. Maybe it didn't matter who had helped, only that help had come when they needed it most. Maybe accepting grace with gratitude was more important than protecting her pride. But late that night, lying in her own bed for the first time in a week, Tiana couldn't stop thinking about Jonathan's voice when he talked about using money to make the world better. About caring for someone who was drowning. Grace and Sophia's matchmaking plan was working in ways they could never have imagined. Their father had learned to cook more than pancakes. He'd learned to love again even if the woman he loved was too proud and scared to let herself love him back. At least not yet. 2 weeks after Rose's successful surgery, Tiana was restocking napkin dispensers at Murphy's Diner when the bell chimed and Grace and Sophia walked in holding hands. No Jonathan in sight, just two determined 7-year-olds marching toward her with the purposeful stride of generals planning an invasion. "Miss Tiana," Grace announced before they'd even reached her station, "we need to talk to you." "About very important business," Sophia added seriously. Tiana's heart skipped at seeing them again. She'd missed their bright chatter, their innocent observations, their way of making the ordinary world feel magical just by being in it. "Where's your dad?" she asked, glancing toward the entrance. "He's parking the car. We told him we wanted to come in first," Grace explained. "To talk to you privately," Sophia clarified. The girls climbed onto stools at the counter with practiced ease, fixing Tiana with identical stares that were surprisingly intense for children their age. "We know what you did," Grace said without preamble. "What I did?" "You stopped being our friend because you thought Daddy was being nice to you just because he has money," Sophia explained with the bluntness only children possessed. Tiana's cheeks flushed. "Girls, that's complicated." "No, it's not," Grace interrupted. "It's actually very simple. Daddy likes you because you're nice and funny and you make good pancakes and you don't get mad when we ask too many questions. And you like Daddy because he's handsome and kind and he makes you smile," Sophia added. "We see how you look at him. The money part is just silly," Grace continued. Daddy has always had money, but he's never brought anyone home to teach him cooking before. He's never talked about anyone the way he talks about you. Tiana felt exposed under their earnest gazes. How does he talk about me? The girls exchanged one of their telepathic looks before Sophia answered. Like you're the most wonderful person in the world. Like when he talks about mommy but different. Happy sad instead of just sad. He thinks you're beautiful, Grace added matter-of-factly. He told Mrs. Henderson that you have the kindest eyes he's ever seen. And the prettiest smile, Sophia contributed. Girls, we're not done, Grace said firmly. We also know that someone helped your grandma with her surgery, and we know Daddy was really happy that day but he wouldn't tell us why. He gets this secret smile when he does nice things for people, Sophia explained. Like when he bought all the Girl Scout cookies from the girl outside the grocery store who was crying because nobody wanted any. Or when he paid for the old man's groceries at the store when his card got declined, Grace added. Tiana stared at them, pieces clicking into place. Jonathan had helped her grandmother, but these little girls had figured it out through pure observation and love. Does that make you mad? Sophia asked anxiously. That he helped. Because if it does, you're being silly, Grace said with characteristic directness. When people love you, they want to help you. That's what families do. We're not family, Tiana protested weakly. We could be, both girls said simultaneously. Before Tiana could respond, the diner door chimed again and Jonathan walked in. His eyes found his daughter's immediately, then shifted to Tiana with an expression of resigned embarrassment. Girls, I thought we talked about this, he said, approaching the counter. We are talking about it, Grace replied innocently. We're explaining to Miss Tiana why she's being silly. Silly? Jonathan's eyebrows rose. About the money thing, Sophia clarified. We told her you've always had money but you've never cared about anyone like you care about her. Jonathan's face flushed deep red. Girls, that's enough. It's true, isn't it? Grace challenged. Jonathan looked at Tiana helplessly and she saw in his eyes everything the girls had described. Affection, hope, vulnerability, and something deeper that made her breath catch. It's true, he said quietly, his gaze locked on hers. Every word of it. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Tiana's heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. I owe you a thank you, she said finally. You don't owe me anything. For my grandmother. For the rent. For giving me back my life. Jonathan glanced at his daughters, who were watching this exchange with the intensity of sports fans following a championship game. I don't know what you're talking about, he said carefully. Jonathan. But if someone helped your family, he continued, I'm glad. You deserve every good thing that comes your way. Why? She whispered. Because you're extraordinary. Because you give away pancakes to strangers and teach cooking to hopeless bachelors and treat other people's children like they're precious gifts. Because you work 3 jobs and go to school and take care of your grandmother without complaining. Because you're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. Grace and Sophia sighed in perfect unison, like they were watching their favorite romantic movie. Also, Sophia added helpfully, because he loves you. Sophia, Jonathan warned, but his heart wasn't in the reprimand. Well, you do, Grace said reasonably. And she loves you too. We can tell. Tiana felt tears prick her eyes. These girls saw everything so clearly, without the complicated filters adults use to protect themselves from disappointment. Is that true? Jonathan asked softly. Do you love me? The question was simple and devastating. Standing in the fluorescent-lit diner where they'd first met, surrounded by the smell of coffee and fried food, with 2 matchmaking 7-year-olds as witnesses, Tiana finally let herself admit the truth. Yes, she whispered. I do. Jonathan's smile was radiant. Thank God. I was starting to think I'd imagined everything. We told you she liked you, Grace said smugly. We're very good at reading people, Sophia added with pride. You certainly are, Tiana agreed, wiping at her eyes. You two planned this whole thing, didn't you? Not the whole thing, Grace said diplomatically. We just helped it along. Like giving it a little push, Sophia explained. Jonathan reached across the counter and took Tiana's hand, threading their fingers together like they'd been doing it for years instead of moments. So what happens now? He asked. Now we try again, Tiana said, marveling at how simple it sounded when she stopped fighting it. Without the pride and fear and overthinking. Can we have pancakes to celebrate? Grace asked hopefully. It's 4 in the afternoon, Jonathan pointed out. Pancakes are appropriate at any time, Sophia declared with authority. She's absolutely right, Tiana agreed, already reaching for the order pad. Celebration pancakes are a family tradition. The word family slipped out naturally and none of them corrected it. As Tiana called in their order and Jonathan helped the girls settle into their regular booth, it felt like the missing pieces of their lives were finally clicking into place. Later, as they shared a plate of pancakes and listened to Grace and Sophia plan their next matchmaking project, apparently Mrs. Henderson needed a husband, Tiana marveled at how different everything looked from this side of honesty. Jonathan wasn't a billionaire trying to buy her affection. He was a man who'd lost his wife and was learning to love again, who'd found in her someone worth fighting for even when she was too scared to fight for herself. She wasn't a charity case or a feel-good project. She was a woman who'd earned her place at this table through kindness and strength and the ability to see the good in people even when they couldn't see it in themselves. And Grace and Sophia weren't just sweet children playing matchmaker. They were wise little souls who'd recognized something their father needed and maneuvered both adults toward happiness with the ruthless efficiency of tiny cupids. So, Jonathan said as they prepared to leave, dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere without fluorescent lights and plastic menus? I'd love that, Tiana replied without hesitation. Can we come too? Grace asked hopefully. Absolutely not, Jonathan said firmly. Some things are just for grown-ups. The girls pouted, but their disappointment was clearly fake. They'd gotten what they wanted, their father smiling again and the woman they'd chosen as their new mother firmly ensconced in their lives. As Tiana watched them leave, Grace and Sophia skipping ahead while Jonathan lingered to steal one more smile, she realized that fairy tales weren't about perfect people in perfect circumstances. They were about ordinary people choosing to love each other despite all the reasons it seemed impossible. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got two tiny fairy godmothers to help make it happen. 1 year later, Tiana stood in the same Murphy's diner where everything had begun, but tonight it looked completely different. Pete had closed the restaurant for a private party, and every surface sparkled with white lights and roses. The worn booths had been transformed with elegant linens, and the harsh fluorescent lighting had been replaced with soft, romantic illumination. Grace and Sophia sat at their old regular table, practically vibrating with excitement in matching pink dresses that they'd insisted were perfect for a proposal party. They'd been planning this evening for months, conspiring with Jonathan while Tiana remained blissfully unaware of their latest scheme. Are you nervous? Rose asked, squeezing Tiana's hand. Her grandmother looked radiant in her navy blue dress, the picture of health 8 months after her successful surgery. Terrified, Tiana admitted, smoothing the skirt of her emerald green dress. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever owned, a gift from Jonathan that she'd finally learned to accept with grace instead of guilt. The past year had been a revelation in every possible way. Jonathan's patience with her pride, his understanding of her need to maintain her independence even while building a life together, had slowly dissolved every wall she'd built around her heart. He'd continued the cooking lessons, not because he needed them anymore but because Sunday mornings in his kitchen had become their sacred time, just the two of them planning menus and talking about everything and nothing. Tiana had graduated from nursing school with honors and accepted a position in the pediatric wing of Chicago General. Jonathan had been in the front row at graduation, cheering louder than anyone else while Grace and Sophia held up signs that said, "Our Miss Tiana is the smartest ever." "He's here," Grace announced unnecessarily, since everyone could see Jonathan walking through the door in a black suit that made him look like a movie star. But it was the expression on his face that took Tiana's breath away. Pure love, mixed with nervousness and joy and something that looked suspiciously like the same expression he'd worn that first night when she'd given his family free pancakes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan said, his voice carrying easily through the transformed diner, "a year ago, I sat in this very booth with my daughters trying to figure out how to order dinner. I had no idea that decision would change my entire life." Grace and Sophia giggled, remembering their part in that fateful evening. A beautiful, kind waitress gave us more than food that night. She gave us hope. She showed us what love looks like when it's given without expectation, what family means when it's chosen rather than obligated. Tiana's eyes filled with tears as Jonathan moved closer to where she stood near the counter. "Tiana Williams, you've taught me how to make pancakes without burning them, how to braid hair for school pictures, and how to believe in fairy tales again. You've been patient with my mistakes, gentle with my daughters' hearts, and brave enough to love us even when your pride said you shouldn't." He dropped to one knee in the middle of the diner, pulling out a ring box that made Grace and Sophia squeal with delight. "You've made our house a home and our family complete. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a vintage emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like stars. But it was the hope in Jonathan's eyes that made Tiana's decision easy. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, absolutely yes. The diner erupted in cheers as Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home. Grace and Sophia launched themselves from their booth, wrapping around both adults in a group hug that nearly toppled them all. I told you our plan would work, Grace said smugly. We're the best matchmakers ever, Sophia agreed. You certainly are, Tiana laughed, kissing both girls on their foreheads. Though I think you two had this figured out before your dad or I had any idea what was happening. Obviously, Grace said with the confidence of a 7-year-old who'd successfully orchestrated true love. Pete appeared with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for the girls, raising his glass in a toast. To Tiana and Jonathan, who proved that the best love stories start with kindness and end with family. As they celebrated with the people who mattered most, Tiana marveled at the journey that had brought them here. The financial crisis that had nearly destroyed her had led to the revelation of Jonathan's identity, which had led to the misunderstanding that had almost driven them apart, which had led to the gesture that had brought them back together stronger than before. Any regrets? Jonathan murmured against her ear as they swayed to music someone had started playing from speakers Pete had hidden around the diner. Only one, Tiana replied, smiling up at him. What's that? I wish I could go back and tell that scared, exhausted waitress that giving away $18 worth of pancakes was going to be the best investment she ever made. Jonathan's laugh was rich and warm. I think she knew. Deep down, I think she knew she was changing everything that night. Maybe. Or maybe some things are just meant to be. Definitely meant to be, Grace announced, appearing beside them with Sophia in tow. We told you from the very beginning that you should marry Daddy. And now you are, Sophia added with satisfaction. Which means we get to be flower girls and pick out our own dresses and throw petals everywhere. Lots and lots of petals, Grace agreed. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Tiana walked down the aisle of a small church filled with everyone they loved. Grace and Sophia preceded her, scattering rose petals with the enthusiasm of children who'd been given permission to make a beautiful mess. Jonathan waited at the altar with tears in his eyes and a smile that outshone the sun streaming through stained glass windows. Rose sat in the front row beaming with pride, healthy and radiant and ready to dance at her granddaughter's wedding. As Tiana took Jonathan's hands and promised to love him for the rest of their lives, she thought about that night at Murphy's diner when desperation had led to kindness, which had led to love, which had led to this perfect moment. You may kiss the bride, the minister announced, and Jonathan did, thoroughly and joyfully, while Grace and Sophia cheered and the congregation applauded. Later, at the reception, as they cut cake and danced to their favorite song and watched their daughters charm every guest with stories about their successful matchmaking, Tiana pulled Jonathan aside for a quiet moment. Thank you, she said, straightening his tie unnecessarily. For what? For seeing me. Really seeing me, not just my circumstances or my problems. For being patient while I figured out how to let myself be loved. Thank you for being brave enough to love us back, Jonathan replied, spinning her around until she laughed with pure joy. From across the dance floor, Grace and Sophia watched their parents with satisfaction. Their plan had worked perfectly, just as they'd known it would. Their father was happy, their new mother was beautiful, and their family was exactly what they'd ordered that night when they'd whispered their hopes to a kind waitress who'd given them free pancakes. What should we do next? Grace asked her sister, already scanning the reception for their next project. Help Uncle Michael find a wife, Sophia replied without hesitation. He's been sad since his divorce. Good idea. Do you think Miss Patricia from Daddy's office would like him? Definitely. She laughs at his jokes and she always smells like cookies. As the twins began plotting their next matchmaking adventure, Tiana and Jonathan danced under twinkling lights, surrounded by love and laughter and the absolute certainty that some fairy tales really do come true. Sometimes they start with 2 hungry little girls and a father who doesn't know how to make pancakes. Sometimes they're interrupted by pride and fear and misunderstandings that seem insurmountable. But if you're very lucky and if you have 2 determined fairy godmothers working behind the scenes, they end with a family choosing each other every single day, creating their own happy ending one shared meal at a time. The waitress who'd given away free food had become a wife and mother. The billionaire who'd forgotten how to be happy had learned to love again. And 2 little girls who'd lost their mother had gained something even more precious. The knowledge that love multiplies when it's shared, and families can be built from kindness, patience, and the courage to believe in fairy tales. In Murphy's diner, where it all began, Pete hung a photo of the wedding party above the coffee machine. Every time he looked at it, he smiled and remembered that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories start with the most ordinary acts of kindness. And if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you could almost hear the echo of two little girls whispering their plans into the universe, confident that love always finds a way when you're brave enough to help it along.